A man, full of entitlement, stood in the way of a marching royal guard, certain that his money and status would shield him from consequence. But with one decisive step, the guard proved otherwise, and the crowd witnessed arrogance get swiftly put in its place. Here's how it unfolded. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow at this exact time, we're bringing you another unforgettable story of the Royal Guard's unshakable discipline and bravery. The crisp London morning air carried the distant echo of synchronized footsteps as crowds assembled along the Mall. Among the gathering spectators stood a figure who would soon become internet infamous: Marcus Wellington Price, heir to a telecommunications fortune and possessor of an ego that dwarfed his considerable bank account. At 38, Marcus embodied everything distasteful about inherited privilege. His bespoke huntsman suit, tailored on Savile Row for the price of a luxury automobile, draped his frame with the kind of perfection that only unlimited funds could achieve. Diamond cufflinks caught the morning light as he gestured dismissively at the crowd barriers, separating ordinary mortals from the ceremonial route. The rhythmic thunder of military boots grew louder as the household division approached. Leading this scarlet river of tradition was Company Sergeant Major William Blackwood, a career soldier whose 24 years of service had been dedicated to preserving the sacred rituals of British pageantry. His weathered face, hidden beneath the iconic burskin, bore the stern expression of a man who had witnessed countless ceremonies and would tolerate no interference with their execution. Marcus withdrew an expensive cohiba from his platinum cigarette case, the Cuban tobacco representing yet another display of his disregard for convention. His circle of equally privileged companions gathered around him like vultures sensing opportunity, their designer accessories gleaming as they prepared their phones to document whatever spectacle their friend had planned. Father's influence reaches everywhere, Marcus declared with casual arrogance, striking a match with theatrical flair. These toy soldiers will learn their place soon enough. A Metropolitan Police constable, sensing the brewing confrontation, approached with growing urgency. His radio crackled with status updates as the ceremonial formation drew within 40 meters of the potential obstruction. "Sir, immediate evacuation of the parade route is mandatory," the officer announced, his professional demeanor barely concealing his exasperation. "This constitutes active military operations under Crown authority." Marcus turned toward the constable with the languid movements of a man unaccustomed to being questioned. From his inner pocket, he produced a platinum credit card that gleamed like a talisman of invincibility. "What's the going rate for a minor route adjustment?" Marcus inquired, his tone suggesting this was merely another transaction in a life built on purchased solutions. The officer's jaw tightened visibly. 3 decades of law enforcement had exposed him to every variety of human arrogance, yet the casual assumption that military ceremony could be bought still managed to astound him. "Sir, this involves Crown protocol and military law. Financial considerations are irrelevant." But Marcus had already dismissed the warning, stepping deliberately across the barrier with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem that money couldn't solve. His handcrafted Oxford shoes clicked against the historic stones as he positioned himself directly in the path of approaching military might. The assembled crowd drew collective breath as phones emerged from pockets and purses. History was about to unfold, though not in the manner anyone expected. Company Sergeant Major Blackwood had navigated every conceivable challenge during his ceremonial career: torrential downpours, sweltering heat waves, and the occasional confused tourist had all been absorbed into the seamless execution of his duties. Yet the sight of deliberate obstruction ahead represented something entirely different, a direct assault on the traditions he had sworn to protect. The formation maintained its relentless advance, 60 pairs of boots creating a percussion that had echoed through London streets since the reign of Charles II. Each guardsman represented months of intensive training in the precise art of ceremonial movement. Their collective will focused on a single objective: the flawless completion of their assigned duty. Marcus savored another draw from his Cuban cigar, positioning himself with the casual confidence of someone addressing household staff. His entourage had climbed onto nearby benches for optimal camera angles, their excitement building as they anticipated their wealthy friend's latest exhibition of privilege overcoming authority. "This footage will be legendary," whispered one companion, adjusting his designer sunglasses. Marcus versus the entire British military establishment. The Queen's Guard pressed forward with mechanical precision, their advance governed by protocols established across centuries of service. Each man carried within him the weight of regimental honor, the understanding that their individual actions reflected upon generations of soldiers who had marched these same routes in service to the crown. 25 meters, 20, 15. The atmosphere grew electric with anticipation. Even Marcus's companions had fallen silent, suddenly recognizing that their joke might have consequences beyond their privileged comprehension. The approaching wall of scarlet and steel represented something that transcended social status or financial influence. Marcus raised his hand in an imperious gesture, as though commanding servants at one of his father's estates. Halt immediately, he commanded, his voice carrying the expectation of automatic obedience. I demand you recognize my authority. The Queen's Guard recognized no authority save the crown they served. Rain, snow, or entitled billionaires, nothing altered their sacred duty to complete each ceremony with unwavering precision. 10 meters, 5, 3. The collision arrived with the inevitability of gravity itself. Blackwood's ceremonial rifle, maintained at the regulation angle perfected through countless drill sessions, intersected with Marcus's torso, in what military investigators would later classify as an unavoidable consequence of civilian interference. The sound, part surprised exhalation, part sharp impact, part the satisfying crack of reality meeting delusion, resonated across the mall like a gunshot. Marcus collapsed with the gracelessness of a marionette whose strings had been severed, his expensive cigar arcing through the air before landing in a decorative fountain, where it extinguished with an appropriate hiss. What followed would be dissected frame by frame across social media platforms worldwide. 2.5 tons of disciplined military force flowed over Marcus Wellington Price, like a crimson tsunami, each boot finding its target with the precision that distinguished professional soldiers from civilian pretenders. The formation never wavered. Not a single guardsman broke stride or altered his bearing. They had been conditioned to continue their sacred duty regardless of obstacles, whether those obstacles manifested as unexpected weather, mechanical failures, or delusional aristocrats who believed wealth granted them dominion over military protocol. Marcus emerged from beneath the scarlet wave resembling a garment that had survived an industrial washing machine malfunction. His huntsman suit, crafted by artisans whose waiting lists stretched for years, now hung in tatters around his bruised frame. One Oxford shoe had vanished entirely, presumably claimed as tribute by the relentless march of tradition over entitlement. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of gasps, cheers, and the rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters. This represented content gold, the spectacular humiliation of privilege encountering its natural predator, in the form of unwavering duty and discipline. Marcus struggled to his feet, his perfectly styled hair now resembling the aftermath of a small explosion. His complexion, which had begun the morning with the healthy pallor of inherited comfort, had transformed into a mottled purple that spoke of both physical trauma and psychological shock. His companions rushed forward, their designer accessories suddenly appearing inadequate for the chaos they had helped orchestrate. Their cameras, positioned to capture triumph over authority, had instead documented complete and utter defeat. "Marcus, my God, Marcus, can you hear us?" one called out, though his concern seemed more focused on potential liability than genuine friendship. But Marcus existed beyond hearing. He was experiencing something his wealth had always insulated him from: the brutal education that comes when consequence finally catches up with chronic entitlement. For the first time in his privileged existence, his family's fortune, his social connections, and his assumption of superiority had proven utterly worthless. The Queen's Guard continued their march as though nothing had occurred. To them, Marcus had represented nothing more than a temporary impediment, no different from a fallen tree branch or an aggressive pigeon. Their duty remained focused on the crown, on tradition, and on the ceremony that connected them to centuries of British military heritage. As Marcus fought to regain his equilibrium, the full magnitude of his situation began penetrating his shocked consciousness. The crowd that had gathered for ceremonial pageantry was now focused entirely on his disgrace, their mobile devices capturing every moment of his downfall for posterity. The police constable who had attempted to warn him was now speaking rapidly into his radio, summoning medical assistance and additional support. But it was Company Sergeant Major Blackwood who commanded Marcus's traumatized attention. The man who had led the formation responsible for flattening him possessed an aura of absolute authority that transcended mere military rank, even to the ceremonial requirements that maintained his impassive expression. An unmistakable satisfaction seemed to radiate from beneath his towering burskin. "Marcus, his expensive suit hanging like battle-torn flags, extended a trembling finger toward Blackwood. His voice, when it finally emerged, carried the shrill desperation of a man whose fundamental worldview had just been demolished. "Are you aware of my father's identity?" he shrieked, the words echoing across the mall with the pathetic edge of someone whose entire arsenal consisted of inherited influence. The question lingered in the morning air like smoke from his extinguished cigar. This was the nuclear option that had opened doors, silenced critics, and extracted Marcus from every previous consequence throughout his sheltered existence. It represented his ultimate insurance policy against accountability. Blackwood's response emerged without compromising his ceremonial bearing, without the slightest deviation from his military composure. His voice carried the authority of 2 decades serving the crown and the backing of traditions that predated the Wellington Price fortune by centuries. "Negative, sir. However, I can identify what you represent: direct interference with Her Majesty's ceremonial obligations." The words struck Marcus with the force of physical blows. In that crystalline moment, he encountered something his father's telecommunications empire couldn't influence, couldn't purchase, and couldn't corrupt. The Queen's Guard served an authority that existed beyond wealth, and their loyalty operated according to principles that no amount of money could compromise. The surrounding crowd began applauding spontaneously. These were ordinary citizens who had arrived to witness tradition, but had instead been treated to something far more satisfying: the spectacle of entitled privilege meeting its match in the form of unwavering duty and professional discipline. 2 Ministry of Defense police officers approached with the swift efficiency of professionals who had monitored the situation from its inception. They had observed Marcus's barrier transgression, witnessed his confrontation with civilian police, and were now prepared to address the aftermath of his catastrophic miscalculation. The metallic click of handcuffs seemed to punctuate Marcus's transition from privileged observer to criminal defendant. His wrists, previously adorned only with Swiss timepieces worth small fortunes, were now embraced by the cold steel of legal consequence. "Marcus Wellington Price," the senior officer announced with the formal precision of official proceedings, "you stand arrested for obstruction of military ceremony, breach of public order, and assault upon members of Her Majesty's forces." "Assault," Marcus sputtered, his voice achieving new octaves of indignation. "They committed assault against me. I'm clearly the victim in this situation." The officer's expression maintained professional neutrality, though a subtle glimmer of amusement flickered in his eyes. "Sir, you deliberately positioned yourself within the path of an active military formation and attempted to disrupt their lawful ceremonial duties. Any physical contact resulted directly from your intentional actions." Marcus's entourage observed in horrified fascination as their friend was escorted toward a waiting police transport. Their expensive recording equipment, prepared to document his triumph over institutional authority, had instead captured his comprehensive humiliation. The footage they had obtained would soon propagate across global social media platforms, though not in any manner they had anticipated. The crowd continued cheering as Marcus was guided into the police van. These were people who understood the value of honest work, who respected legitimate authority, and who appreciated the significance of tradition. Witnessing someone who considered himself above such concepts receive appropriate education generated profound satisfaction. As the vehicle doors sealed behind Marcus, his final glimpse of the mall featured Company Sergeant Major Blackwood leading his formation toward Buckingham Palace. The ceremony proceeded as though nothing had transpired, because to the Queen's Guard, nothing truly had. They had encountered an obstacle, addressed it according to their training, and continued fulfilling their sacred obligations. The scarlet tunics and imposing burskins disappeared around the corner, leaving behind only the echoes of their perfectly synchronized steps and the lingering essence of tradition triumphant over arrogance. News of Marcus's confrontation with the Queen's Guard propagated across social media, with the viral velocity reserved for genuine schadenfreude. The hashtag Guardian Justice achieved trending status within hours, accompanied by hundreds of videos and photographs captured by the assembled witnesses. The footage appeared everywhere: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Each platform supplied its own interpretation of events, but the fundamental narrative remained consistent. Entitled "Wealthy Individual Encounters Immovable Military Tradition and Suffers Spectacular Defeat," professional news organizations embraced the story by evening. The BBC, maintaining their characteristic British restraint, reported it as an incident involving a civilian and the household division. During this morning's ceremonial duties, international outlets demonstrated less reserve, with American networks broadcasting under headlines like "Telecommunications Air Receives Military-Grade Reality Check." The memes, however, truly captured public imagination. Images of Marcus being overwhelmed by the Queen's Guard were paired with captions, such as "When you attempt to purchase tradition and some education costs more than others." The most popular meme featured Marcus's shocked expression with the text "Daddy's money" versus centuries of military discipline. Confined within his holding cell, Marcus was experiencing cultural displacement of the most profound variety. The detention facility was clean but austere, representing a dramatic departure from the luxury accommodations that had defined his existence. The thin mattress, fluorescent illumination, and complete absence of concierge services embodied a lifestyle he had never imagined experiencing personally. His solicitor, summoned through frantic communications from his entourage, arrived within hours. Jonathan Pemberton represented one of London's most expensive legal practices, a professional whose fees could purchase luxury vehicles, but whose expertise had never been tested against the full weight of military tradition and crown authority. "This situation is absolutely outrageous," Pemberton declared upon entering the consultation room. "We'll initiate proceedings for assault, unlawful detention, and psychological trauma. I'll secure your release within the hour." But Marcus no longer possessed the confidence that had characterized his cigar-lighting performance that morning. The events had shaken fundamental assumptions about how his world operated, forcing him to confront something that money had never been required to address. The legal proceedings following Marcus's arrest became a comprehensive examination of privilege, intersecting with protocol. Pemberton, maintaining his reputation for aggressive advocacy, filed a substantial lawsuit against the Ministry of Defense within 24 hours, alleging that his client had suffered excessive force and unlawful assault. The lawsuit demanded damages in the millions, portraying Marcus as an innocent observer who had been brutally attacked by undisciplined soldiers who had failed to exercise appropriate restraint. The legal document painted a picture of unprovoked military aggression against a civilian who posed no legitimate threat. The Crown's legal response proved swift and devastating. Their team, supported by centuries of precedent and military law, filed comprehensive counter-motions that detailed the facts with clinical precision. Marcus had willfully obstructed active military ceremony, ignored police warnings, and placed himself in danger through his own deliberate actions. The character evidence, however, provided the most damaging blow to Marcus's case. Crown investigators had conducted thorough research, uncovering a pattern of entitled behavior that his family's wealth had previously concealed. Through generous settlements and confidentiality agreements, the evidence included the incident at an exclusive Chelsea restaurant where Marcus had demanded the sommelier be terminated because a wine vintage didn't meet his expectations. There was documentation of the time he had instructed his driver to use emergency vehicle lanes because he was late for a polo match. The yacht club incident where he had demanded a Commodore's daughter be removed from the premises because she was wearing similar jewelry to his companion. Each previous incident had been quietly resolved through substantial financial payments and legal non-disclosure agreements. But military justice operated according to different principles, and the Queen's Guard answered to authorities that transcended material wealth. Media coverage of the legal proceedings proved extensive and largely unsympathetic to Marcus's situation. Legal experts appeared on television programs to explain why his case was fundamentally flawed, while social media continued celebrating his comeuppance with increasing creativity and humor. Company Sergeant Major Blackwood had maintained professional discretion throughout the media storm surrounding the incident. 24 years of military service had instilled the value of appropriate silence, and he understood that his duty was to the Crown rather than public opinion or media attention. Privately, however, he permitted himself a moment of professional satisfaction. Throughout his ceremonial career, he had encountered numerous obstacles: inclement weather, wildlife interference, and occasional tourists who wandered too close to the formation. But never had he faced such blatant disrespect for the traditions he had sworn to preserve and protect. The incident had evolved into a teaching moment throughout the regiment. Junior guardsmen who had witnessed the event spoke of it with mixture of respect and amusement. Here was tangible proof that their traditions possessed genuine meaning, that the ceremonies they performed represented living embodiments of duty and honor, rather than mere tourist entertainment. Blackwood's colleagues had begun referring to the incident as the Wellington Price Protocol, a phrase that captured both the humor and justice of what had transpired. It had become integrated into the regiment's informal history, a story destined to be transmitted through generations of future guardsmen. The official inquiry into the incident proved brief and conclusive. The investigating officer, a brigadier with 3 decades of experience, determined that Blackwood and his men had operated within established parameters of their training and duty. The contact with Marcus had been unavoidable given his deliberate positioning within the formation's path, and the guardsmen had continued their ceremony as required by military protocol. The inquiry's report, while not released publicly, circulated through military channels with the velocity of satisfying news. Here was confirmation that traditional values still possessed relevance, that duty and honor could triumph over wealth and entitlement. For Blackwood personally, the incident had reinforced his fundamental beliefs about military service. The Queen's Guard were not tourist attractions or museum displays, they were active soldiers, whose duty transcended mundane civilian concerns. They represented something greater than individual interests, something that couldn't be purchased, influenced, or corrupted. The aftermath of Marcus's encounter with the Queen's Guard extended far beyond legal proceedings and media coverage. The incident had resonated with something fundamental in the British consciousness, creating satisfaction at witnessing entitled privilege encounter its natural enemy in the form of unwavering tradition. Public opinion surveys demonstrated overwhelming support for the Queen's Guard's actions, with 96% of respondents agreeing that Marcus had received appropriate consequences. The incident had become symbolic of larger themes, the concept that certain things in life remained beyond purchase, that specific institutions maintained immunity to wealth's corrupting influence. Marcus's father, Sir Reginald Wellington Price, had constructed his telecommunications empire through inheritance, strategic investments, and the network of connections that money could cultivate. But even his considerable influence possessed limitations, and those boundaries had been reached when his son chose to challenge the Queen's Guard. Sir Reginald's attempts to leverage his political connections to influence the case had been politely but firmly rejected. The Ministry of Defense had clarified that military discipline remained beyond civilian interference, regardless of the source or magnitude of that interference. The family's crisis management firm had attempted damage control, releasing statements emphasizing Marcus's commitment to charitable organizations and his respect for British institutions. But the footage of him being trampled by the Queen's Guard communicated more effectively than any press release could achieve. The incident had also generated broader discussions about privilege, entitlement, and tradition's role in contemporary society. Opinion writers utilized Marcus's story as a foundation for examining class dynamics, wealth concentration, and the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Some commentators defended Marcus, arguing that the Queen's Guard had employed excessive force against a civilian who presented no genuine threat. But these voices were vastly overwhelmed by those who interpreted the incident as an overdue reminder that money couldn't purchase exemption from all consequences. 8 months following his encounter with the Queen's Guard, Marcus Wellington Price had evolved into a cautionary tale of epic proportions. His lawsuit had been dismissed with prejudice, preventing any possibility of refiling. The judge's ruling had been particularly severe, describing Marcus's behavior as an exhibition of entitlement so extreme as to challenge reasonable comprehension. The criminal charges had resulted in convictions for obstruction of military ceremony, breach of public order, and contempt of court, the latter charge stemming from his attempt to offer the bailiff a substantial bribe during his initial hearing. While the sentence remained relatively modest: community service, significant financial penalties, and probation, the damage to his reputation proved irreversible. The footage of his trampling had achieved status as one of internet history's most viewed videos, generating countless remixes, parodies, and derivative content. Marcus's face had become synonymous with entitled stupidity, and his surname had entered urban vocabulary as a verb meaning to receive comeuppance through arrogant overreach. His social circle had systematically abandoned him, not from moral outrage but from social embarrassment. Association with Marcus had become a liability in circles where reputation mattered as much as financial worth. The incident had transformed him in ways that money couldn't repair or reverse. For the first time in his existence, Marcus had encountered something that didn't yield to his will or his wallet, and the experience had fundamentally altered his understanding of how the world actually functioned. Company Sergeant Major Blackwood, meanwhile, had received quiet commendation from his superiors for maintaining the dignity and discipline of the Queen's Guard under challenging circumstances. The incident had become integrated into the regiment's proud history, serving as a reminder that certain traditions possessed strength that transcended any individual's sense of entitlement. As tourists continued gathering along the mall to observe the Queen's Guard performing their ceremonial duties, they did so with enhanced appreciation for what they were witnessing. This wasn't mere pageantry, it was a living demonstration of values that transcended wealth, social status, and personal convenience. The Queen's Guard marched forward, their scarlet tunics brilliant in the London sunlight, their burskin hats tall and dignified, their duty absolutely unwavering. They had demonstrated that certain aspects of life remained constant, that tradition could triumph over entitlement, and that genuine respect couldn't be purchased at any price. Marcus Wellington Price had received that education through direct experience, and the world had observed every satisfying moment of his instruction.